Welcome to the Republican Professor. We have Professor Stowell with us today to do a post-election analysis. It's good to have you with us.
Good to be here, Luke.
Been a while.
Yes, it has.
So, how are you feeling since the election?
How am I feeling? Fine, actually. I have no real uh honestly no real emotional connection to the election itself, which is a rarity for me, I think. So, I don't know exactly what that means, but yeah, I think I've learned at least to disconnect my regular life from whatever's going on in the political sphere. Um, that our happiness or well-being is somehow dependent on political outcomes is something that we should seriously think about.
Yeah, I gotcha. Well, let's
But
get the date on here. It's 19 November 2024. So it's 2 weeks since the 2024 election polls were closed. I myself am relieved. I think there was a lot riding on this election, and it always makes me feel, well, jittery because I've been in the classroom like you have been for a long time, and I know especially what the last 10 years has been like in the classroom, especially the last, well, since Trump was elected the first time. It seems like higher education has just gotten worse and worse. And these folks go out and supposedly they vote, but um, you know, this is supposed to be run by the people, and if the people are grade inflated, I mean, have you noticed grade inflation? Have you noticed what have you noticed on
well,
campus?
I don't even know if it's noticed because as a part-timer,
Hmm.
um, you're at least a step or two removed from the political and bureaucratic machinery. Um, so as far as grade inflation goes, I think it's no secret it's been happening for a really long time, right? This is we're in our third decade of grade inflation, maybe. That an A and then or what is it, a C, probably a C in the 90s was a B in the early aughts, and then is almost an A now. I mean, that seems to be probably the progression.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so with grade inflation, um, seems to me it's just been a fairly kind of linear trajectory, irrespective of politics, or whoever's in office at the time. So I'm not directly, there's no pressure coming my way for it. I don't experience any of those kinds of things, but there's been plenty of people that have written on this, right? We know this, right? We know that grade inflation is a problem. We know that AI and plagiarism is a problem, especially when it comes to online classes. We know that the number of uh, administrators to faculty ratios have been closing. That gap has been closing for the worse uh, for decades. And so, in that regard, well, today's just Tuesday in that march towards whatever the ultimate, kind of fruition of all this is going to be. Um,
Have
so,
have your views or have your feelings about being excited to teach college, have they changed since you've started?
yeah, they have. Especially, I think, it, for me, I noticed a big difference once, pre-pandemic, maybe 2016, 2017. There was just something different about students. And it wasn't long after that that I became aware that we now were inheriting students, freshmen and sophomores and whatever. These were students who were basically raised with screens in front of them. And so the screenagers, as they call them, I think in some of the sociological studies, uh, there is like a bluntedness to them, both socially and I think just cognitively. And so, and then of course the pandemic has exacerbated that.
Mhm.
Um, but I think, screens, but not just screens. It's not like the actual device that matters necessarily, but the fact that the kind of content that's being consumed, social media, if you read Jonathan Haidt on this, it is social media has been disastrous for young minds and their neurological health. And we have all the data on it. And I think I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's been a number of school districts across the country that have banned cell phones in schools.
Mhm.
Um, I've always had a kind of skeptical eye, right? When there was a time period very early on where it seems like everybody was, it's like, oh, technology in the classroom, like this is our new great hope or something.
Yeah.
And I wasn't buying it at that
Yeah, I
time.
always thought, well, you must be a really crappy professor or teacher if you're so excited about any more technology in the classroom other than the light switch.
Right. Right.
Maybe an
I mean, showing
overhead
like videos
projector.
or documentaries and stuff like that, like they used to roll, probably dating ourselves here, but roll the VCR TV thing into the classroom and you'd see it like a documentary of some sort.
Sure.
But beyond that, the PowerPoint uh, situation, I think it's all for the most part been a detriment. I don't have the data on this, but I think it's been a detriment to learning outcomes,
Hmm.
actual learning, not just memorization. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah. So as far as my feelings on education, it's I think I've always been the mindset is that I just do what I can with the students I'm given in that moment, and that's there's so many variables outside of that that I cannot even remotely affect or um, bring about some other alternative outcome. Uh, so it's just care of the students. It is taking care of them, and as you said, right, we the people. Democracy, right? I mean, one of the necessary conditions I think for a functioning democracy is you have an informed electorate, but I think also a critical electorate, right? So like sometimes people bag on voters, right? Elites, the credentialed class, they bag on voters about, it's like, well, they're just uninformed or they fell victim to fake news. And well, and all of that, it's like, well, the partisan kind of angle on that is it's like, well, they're not buying our information. And so I think an informed and critical populace, right, seems to me to be one of the most important facets of democracy. Um,
Yeah.
and then of course you've got what was the other thing I was thinking about as far as uh, the the democratic impulse. No, I'll have to come back to it. But I was just thinking of an alternative on top of that. But anyways,
Hmm.
so I think it is important to have that critical element, that informed element.
And you have to
And
be
part of the
informed about how to be critical
yeah, and so but you
because
have to also want to
it's not
do it.
just criticizing.
Right. Right. Being critical means taking a healthy skepticism into the policy discussion or whatever is at the front of the political controversy of the moment, perhaps. But it's also like in my classes, uh, I show them an example of well, Richard Swinburne. He doesn't comment on political things at all, seemingly ever, but it doesn't matter because what I do and have done in my classes is show Richard Swinburne, who's a theist, right? He argues very persuasively for God's existence being more probable than not. And but he has, in the work he does, he shows why other theists fail in regards to certain arguments, where those weaknesses are. And so, for the young mind, the student mind, it's like, well, why would you ever be critical of someone who's on your team? And it's like, well, because who's on your team, right? The tribalism that is set in at this point, who's on your team, they might be wrong. They might have a bad position, but just because they're on your team doesn't mean you turn a blind eye
Mhm.
to the bad argument or the bad data. So,
Right.
so that is part of the critical mindset. It's not just being skeptical of the people you disagree with, which is easy.
Hmm.
It's more important, I think, sometimes to be critical, self-critical, and critical of the arguments of the people that you generally agree with. And Richard Swinburne, I think, shows great intellectual virtue in that regard. And so I kind of hold him up as a model for some of my students.
Yeah. Well, on the topic of the election, what do you think? Well, what do you have to say about it? Do you have any concerns or cautions,
uh, I
or
think
you're not
I think
obviously
I
not excited about it? So,
no, it's because this to me, and I think I said this. Maybe we were said this as an aside, or one
Mhm.
of our our friends. I may have made this comment is that uh, and it sounds ridiculous on its face, perhaps that winning is the easy part,
Yeah,
right? Governing is the part where that's where your mettle is tested. And so, to me, as the government starts to be built, I'm looking, at who I'm seeing in office, or who who Mr. Trump is selecting. Um, uh, and it's it's a fraught thing, right? To build a government, to put people into positions of power and control over policy, it is a fraught thing. Doesn't matter what party it is. So in that regard, um, and I think a lot is hanging on that too, right? To
yeah,
deliver on promises
yeah.
and to actually carry out what it is you promised during a campaign, I think that's the difficult part.
This is what worries me is that uh, people who were excited about his promises won't, they don't know enough about American politics to know how difficult it will be for that to happen, for
Sure,
those things to happen.
sure. And I think this is where too
Not
we
because
kind of
of
need,
any fault that he has, but just because of
yeah,
the difficulties of how the American people are fickle.
yes,
The reason we have, well, at least part of the reason we have such a huge government that tries to do everything, tries to regulate everything and make everything perfectly well by regulating everything is that to some extent majorities at some point in time were interpreted to want those things,
hmm
right? And so if you like take the Department of Education, for example, the federal place for education has grown and grown and grown. Well, and in large measure because of, groups of people that lobby together and make it look like there's a majority of people that want that.
hmm
And so if you're going to dismantle the Department of Education, which I think should happen, I don't know I don't know how many people don't know because they graduated from K through 12 and college not learning this that
hmm
that uh it's harder to do than you might imagine. That's
Right,
why Reagan didn't do it, for example.
right. And then also in the political science literature, right? I think if I'm not mistaken, I think it's Paul Pearson. He wrote a book called Political Time. Are you familiar with this?
Politics in time?
Maybe that's the title. It's been a while since I've read it, but part of the central thesis of that book is this concept of path dependence, and it gives this example is that if you say you have a bowl and you put a different color balls in the bowl, like a red ball and a blue ball, and then you pull out a ball, just not looking, you pull a ball out and you say, "Oh, what color is it?" It's red. Okay, so then the part of the kind of game here is you then put a red ball back into the bowl. So
Right.
whatever color you pull out, you put that same color back in. And then you do another draw. But now this time, say if you pull the red ball out, so now you got two red balls in there and a blue ball, you're more likely to choose the red ball.
Yeah.
And so the path dependence side, at some point, it becomes impossible to choose a blue ball because it's buried in red balls, right? You might have some time, right, where there's this is how bureaucracies are built. This is why they're incredibly hard to,
Yeah.
number one, reform, and secondly, or dismantle if they become parasitic upon the government.
Right.
And so I think it's a fairly good hypothesis in terms of why it is that the administrative state, or deep state, or however some people kind of conflate those two things. But it's like, well, we want to take apart different parts. Okay, well, there's a whole bureaucracy that has been built, and this is called path dependence. It's extraordinarily hard to go ahead and grab the blue ball after decades of red balls.
Yeah.
And so I look at it that way in terms of uh, so again, back to the promises to end certain departments and whatnot. It's like, okay, that's good campaign fodder, stump
Sure.
speech material, but again, the actual act and process of governing. And I think because in many cases, right, what the American people, like, why are they so fickle? It's like, well, they've been trained to be fickle, right? Because so many times the credentialed class, right, the elites have made promises and then broken those promises, never kept them, right? And a lot of times they're campaigning on things they ought not to have campaigned on because if they know the literature, they know how extraordinarily hard it is for them to accomplish what it is that they're promising. So I think in some cases, some people have been extraordinarily disingenuous, right? But then again, it's winning, right? As James Carville said, winning is everything, basically, when it comes to elections.
Yeah.
And so, but this is kind of the bed that we've made with all this,
Right.
right? And why the trust in the credentialed class is essentially evaporated. I mean, that's one of the things I think that's come out of this election, as at least one of the data points.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
but as far as the election, this past election itself, what I like to do is I like to aggregate, right? I don't. It's like, well, what polls do you trust? And I'm like, well, all of them, but really none of
So,
them.
so you're are you I'm hoping that where I'm hoping you're gonna go at some point is um what's the threat of misinterpreting the mandate,
Mm.
whether there's a mandate or not. I'm
Yeah.
assuming you're talking about polls. So,
Yes. Yeah. I'll certainly cut back to that, but 2016, right? 2016 was an election where sometimes I like to joke with my students. If my student comes out and says something, I like to just kind of play with them a little bit as far as uh, things that they're saying in the classroom. And so if I have a student will say something that I know that's wrong, and it's like, it's an intro class, so it's, being wrong is 99% of the class basically,
Yeah.
uh, in philosophy. So because again, undergrads come in and their high schools have not prepared them at all to think critically,
Hold
right? Or
on,
to
hold
think in
on one
abstraction.
sec. Let me pause. All right, sorry for that interruption. You were saying? Do you remember what you were saying?
I think I started on the 2016 election, and I was telling a story about students who are getting things wrong in class. And so sometimes I'll tell my students with a straight face, I'll tell them, I said, I'll tell them why I disagree. And then they'll come back. Sometimes they'll come back and say something else, and I'll say, I'm wrong about twice a decade. Are you sure this is one of those times? And it's
Mhm.
I hold the moment for a minute there, and then we all kind of get a chuckle out of it. But
Yeah.
other than well, unless other than like Michael Moore and a handful of faculty at Claremont, I almost nobody saw 2016 happening, right?
Right.
Um, Pretty much. And so I
Yeah.
was wrong about that. And there was a lot of talk about the polls, I think, in the press about the polls being wrong. And in the aftermath, because you can't really judge polling in the moment or the day after. You kind of have to judge it when all the votes are tallied, because there are some states, California, that take seemingly a month to like get everything, squared
Mhm.
away in terms of their vote counting. Um, but so 2016, and really in the aftermath, it looks like the polls were not off by that much. There was a few county level polls and some state polls that really missed the mark. But what emerged from that was kind of the hidden Trump voter.
Mhm.
And the hidden Trump voter seemed to be worth about 3%.
Hmm.
So by 3%, what I mean is if the aggregate polling shows that, say, if Clinton was shown to be up by 6 points in the aggregate, then she was probably closer up to than up to 3 points.
Mhm.
Um, and so,
But these are people that are worried about backlash if other people know, like in their neighborhood, they don't have the
yeah,
Trump sign out, and so they
no,
don't tell the truth.
no, no,
They have a
they're,
flag out.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
There's,
the,
and,
the
and what's
Harris signs
interesting is
almost
that,
never have a flag out.
yeah, and so some of those Trump voters are people, I think, who perhaps were just they live in socioeconomic circles where
Right.
and they've just been suspicious of the left forever, and that was their only option. It was what was it called, the in the Claremont literature, was it the Flight 93 election?
Yeah.
Um, and so it might have been some of those kind of judgments. Some people blame Comey for that, but anyways, as an aside, it seems like there was a 3% or 3 to 4% like hidden Trump voter. So when 2020 came along, and I think you might remember this, uh, I just decided to kind of do my own little work, I guess you could say. And I don't have access to the raw data. I'm just looking at aggregate polling stuff. Uh, but what I did was in 2020, if you remember, I guessed 49 out of the 50 states, right? I guessed 49 out of the 50 states.
Which which one did you get wrong?
I think it was North Carolina I missed.
Okay.
And I pretty much got the split on the Senate, which could have gone either way because the Georgia election was the runoff that happened there. Which if they hadn't gone to runoff, maybe it would have been slightly different. But I think I was either one off or dead even on the Senate. The House was kind of obvious to me that it was going to go the way it was. But also the percentage points. were also something that I was able to get. I think it was something like a 3% margin. But Biden had been polling ahead at like 6% or something, maybe 7%. And so my only method, right, the only adjustment I made on 2020 was just to say, uh, I'm gonna assume that polling operations have not figured out the hidden Trump voter. And that's all I did. And so I sent out my little, to the friends group and said, look, Biden's gonna take this. And I was roundly doubted. And it turns out that yeah, the hidden Trump voter was not something that the polls had taken into consideration. But even then, there were people who misinterpreted 2016, right? Because they just went with this kind of vague idea, like the polls are wrong, the polls are all forgetting, right? Forgetting that polls, right, are self-interested operations,
Right.
right? People look at them suspiciously as if they're the arm of a political party, but at the end of the day, self-interest has always got to be part of your explanatory framework.
Hmm.
And so they're self-interested. So there's no incentive to inflate, right? Even for particular parties, like, well, we're going to inflate the numbers to make it look like so and so is ahead. Well, how does that help the party
Right.
that you're supposed to be helping? Because you're not giving them actionable data. Only accurate data is
Yeah.
actionable by political campaigns.
Right.
And so people were wildly over there. Like, well, the polls were wrong in 2016, but they didn't look at the details. And so they
So,
said, well, they're wrong and they're going to be wrong again because the polls hate Trump or what have you. And so, but now we're looking at, now I'll bring it now to our particular case here, 2024. And the aggregate data, right? If you go on Real Clear Politics, the aggregate polling data was Trump 1.5% ahead. It was Trump up a point and a half. And if you then assume, right, that the hidden Trump voter is still a problem, then that means that Harris is down by at least a point and a half.
right.
And as it stands, literally
Because it
today,
takes care of the margin of error.
right,
Yeah.
right. And so then, so as of today, Trump is at 50% and Harris is at 48.3%, which roughly is that 3 point margin.
Mm.
So this, I think, this to me does a couple of things. One, it does show that polling outfits have been consistent across three elections, and that this 3%, 3 to 4% hidden Trump voter thing is something they have not been able to crack. I mean, part of that is cell phones. If we were back in the days where the phone was on the wall, maybe a different story,
Okay.
right? That's one of the differences from a generation ago in terms of polling.
Hmm.
So, but it also does, as far as some of the more, we'll call it conspiratorial minded about 2020, that there was no overarching, there's no evidence that there was this overarching conspiracy that stole the election, right? Because what we would have seen is 2016, okay, 3 point margin, 3 to 4 points. 2024, 3 to 4 points, but 2020 would have been something different, and it wasn't. Now, it's not to say that there wasn't some sort of like chicanery that was going on, which I think there was, but I don't know that it was sufficient to change the outcome. Um, so that's how I look at elections. Now, I think you said something. We want to get back to something. This was all a lead up to what was your question? I forget what your question
Oh,
was.
just misinterpreting the election. Because the way I look at it is I I'm happy that Trump was elected. I voted for him all three
Hmm.
times. Um, and I think that he has a unique opportunity because had he been elected again in 2020, he wouldn't have had any chance to catch his breath and take a few months and really think about how he would do things differently if he
Hmm.
could. And he had that chance, and it's a rare gift. Now, he was also going through a lot of opposition even when he was out of office, political
Yeah.
opposition, because he can run again. And he has the energy to run again, unlike a lot of other people. He's got a lot of energy. And I think that if he had not won this time, he would have come back a fourth time because he
Hmm.
has that much energy.
Right.
Uh, but um, so he has had a long period of time, and he said this to Joe Rogan that he had to think about what he would do differently, and so he's taking action on what those reflections delivered to him. And I do think that he's not going for being reelected. He's going for leaving his legacy. So he's leaving
Hmm.
it all on the table. Not that he didn't do that last time, but that I think he didn't have the experience to understand exactly what he was up against.
Yeah.
And he has a much better understanding of that than probably most politicians do right now. He got educated really fast. Um, and and I also think that he has more people on his side now.
Hmm.
Like I think that he's got a wider coalition. He's done the politics of addition, like with Bobby Kennedy, for example. This podcast was all over that a year and a half ago. I had my eye on Bobby Kennedy a year and a half ago,
Hmm.
knowing that if he could be folded into the movement somehow, even though he said it, he was saying at the time, he said no. I mean, he was viciously anti-Trump at the time. He was like, "There's no way in hell I'll be his vice president or whatever." I think it was talking about like being vice president or something.
Hmm.
Um, and Trump was like, I don't want him for vice president either. I don't know what he's talking about, but it seemed like there was no thought of him wanting to come on board in the administration at all. As like I think it was kind of like a pride thing. Um, but you know, Bobby's no spring chicken himself. This is his last chance to do anything in an official capacity.
Right.
And if Trump was going to offer him a place of real power where it's his sweet spot, I I knew he would take it.
Hmm.
I knew it. And I knew there was a triangulation because I've been watching these vaccine injured, well, a group of women on Instagram I began following a while ago. And it's either their son or them that had a vaccine injury. And they're extremely tight knit group of women, and they're all Trump people.
Hmm.
Well, not all of them, but they're crunchy. So what's weird about it is when you're looking at them, they look like a bunch of libs. Like if you look at pictures of them, but they're all they're either Bobby Kennedy people or Trump people. So I was like, okay, if he could combine those, there's a lot of women that are they're in some kind of movement here. And if
Hmm.
you get the women, you're going to get the men too. So um I thought that was brilliant. The Elon thing, I didn't see that coming. When he bought Twitter, I it kind of like when we are you on Twitter? I forget.
I'm not.
Okay. Well, I'm not on there as much as I'm on other platforms, but it's pretty bad, man. When they kicked Trump off, I was like, and they kicked him off before he was even done being president, right? I thought uh, this is uh this is going to go south fast for everything online. Every online discussion is going to, there's going to be nowhere to go. And this Truth Social thing that he started, Trump did, I was like, that's not going to possibly compete with Twitter.
Hmm.
Um, and when Elon bought Twitter, I think that was in late 2022, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, not Trump did not get right back on Twitter. I don't know if you noticed that. He was offered a spot
Oh,
on Twitter.
yeah,
He
I
kicked
done.
out
I
his Truth Social.
remember. I think I noticed an absence of that news, so I'm not
Well,
surprised he's not back on it.
it was awkward because when Elon bought Twitter and he bought it overvalued, massively overvalued. So he lost money on it immediately. And he bought a competing thing competing with Trump, competing business interest. and uh and I thought, okay, these guys are obviously not friends, but at the same time, what Elon was doing was, I thought, kind of patriotic.
Hmm.
And and I thought if it's patriotic, it's inherently friendly to Trump.
Hmm.
So I thought, I wonder if, but and then it ended up happening where Elon joined in there, and that's what I'm talking about, the politics of addition. And I know
Hmm.
there's a lot of skepticism about that, as far as like
Yeah.
electric vehicles and space subsidies and all that stuff.
Sure.
But I
Sure.
do think that Elon bought Twitter. I don't think I really do believe he has the beliefs he has about censorship. Anyway,
Uh, yeah. I'll just say on the social media, if the only thing that happens with the buyout is that somehow Twitter just is destroyed. Like this is kind of like these are kind of weird implications or kind of implications I'm thankful for. For one, I'll just say this. I'm thankful for Trump because it took him to force everyone, really the credentialed class, to lay their cards on the table and stop pretending. Right? He was his very presence upended this, I think, this kind of cloaked partisanship in a lot of outlets and institutions, and people. I think that's when you find out, who people really are is under duress. You don't learn who a person is when times are good, when everything is just going along swimmingly. You learn who they are in adversity. And Trump presented a kind of adversity and challenge they had never seen. And
yeah.
part of this, the very first signs of it, remember he got the nickname of Teflon Don, like in 2015. Because my students were asking me like, well, what do you think about Trump? And I'm like, well, what happens in the primaries is people peak and then crash, peak and crash. Like, and someone comes and peaks and then they crash, and then by the time primaries are all said and done, it's everyone's kind of peaked and crashed. And Trump didn't have any of that kind of, his thing was just linear. His popularity was linear. It wasn't peaks and valleys like everyone else. And so I think I'm thankful for Trump because uh, to me it's like the institutional lying and whatnot people were forced out of their little dishonesty boxes about where they stood on things.
Hmm. Can
And
you give an example of what you're talking about? Like being honest and being forced to be honest?
I don't have any specific examples, but I think just at the media level, um, any any media operation that portended objectivity
Oh,
to watch it slide into activism,
oh, okay.
right? But the activism, this is the thing, the activism was always there, right? It just
Right.
was cloaked.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so,
A lot
um,
of professors are like that.
yeah,
A lot
yeah,
of academic conferences are like that.
yeah. So that is something that I'm certainly thankful for.
Yeah,
But
there's always an attempt to have a valence issue that you use as a cudgel. Like for example, with the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, um, you know, they're not going to win because they don't have the numbers to stop him. So you got to have a valence issue.
mhm,
Everything's got to be put into yes or no kind of criminality kind of a thing. So you got to try to make him look like a criminal of some kind. Not just that his ideas are bad and his ideas will be harmful. His
yeah,
pro-constitution, separation of powers, protects individual liberty ideas are so bad. Yeah, that's not going to change anybody's mind. So he wrote something in a girl's high school yearbook that was really sexual, and then he assaulted her when, he was 18 or whatever. I can't remember exactly what the nature of the complaint was. I think it was during high school, during college, high school. And um, yeah, they're doing the same thing with Matt Gaetz now, I think.
mhm,
And uh, these valence issues, like that's the rhetoric of Nazis and all that stuff. That's a valence thing. You can't vote for a Nazi. So so the nuance or getting at the truth of stuff never gets really talked about in a substantive way.
right,
Um, on campus, the way it manifests is different. Like if you're a Republican professor on campus, they're going to be concerned for our community. We're
mhm,
concerned for the vulnerable members of our community. That's the way they catch it. They don't say, uh, I don't like the Republican Party. I don't like him, so let's not hire him. They say stuff like, we're 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 concerned about the safety of members of our, they couch it in criminal terms.
right. And Jonathan Haidt he's already talked about this, right? So that concern, right, turns into a kind of protectionism, kind of
Yeah,
paternalism over the
it's
students.
religious. It's the language of heresy. Yeah,
But that's part of it. Haidt's point is that look, and I think it's Haidt and even well, I think Jordan Peterson probably has talked about this as well. But it's nothing new. In psychology, it's called exposure therapy, right? It's like, how do you reduce your anxiety over a phenomena? You expose yourself to it and see that it's not that bad. You learn to build a kind of resiliency against the thing that you feared, right? And so the kind of hyper paternalism over the students is not doing them any kind of favor. It's actually just making them weaker,
yeah, and
right?
more
And so
annoying.
now places like Heterodox Academy has I don't they champion safe spaces used to be the big thing like 10 years ago or whatever, 15 years ago.
Yeah,
Well, now the rhetoric is turned, or the call is for brave spaces, right? To enter into environments with people you disagree with and learn how to constructively dialogue. And what I was going to say about Twitter or X is that if Trump if Musk buys it, and if all that happens is it gets destroyed, that's fine. Like, I'm totally fine with that, because social media in and of itself is the place where basically nothing positive can get done. Social media is a place where people say things that they would not say when you have the accountability of a human presence across the table from you. So in a way, there's nothing really real about social media. Unfortunately, there are young people whose whole lives is social media, and so it's like they kind of almost live in a simulation in a way. But so social media gets destroyed. I don't think this is a somehow a problem, right? If coming out of that, it's like, well, you know, social media had this big promise, right? Just like tech in the classroom, social media had all this promise for democratizing public space. And then here we are finding out what are people using it for? Cat videos and trying to sell their OnlyFans account or something like that. It's just right.
Well, the importance of Twitter being bought, I think, cannot be overstated because I'll give you just one example. When Tucker got fired from Fox, the main way he broadcasts and people were able to see his new work was on Twitter. It
Sure.
was the long form stuff. Joe Rogan too puts his stuff on Twitter.
Right.
These long form interviews, like I've watched, hours and hours of videos on Twitter. I don't use it for anything else really, but it's also useful for uncensored stuff that the other places are censoring, like for example, Instagram or whatever, or YouTube.
Hmm.
YouTube censors the Republican Professor channel. They,
Yeah.
they I know for a, I've seen my views go from a certain number of views to zero.
Yeah.
I mean, right in front of me, right in front of
Yeah.
my eyes. I've
Yeah.
seen it with my own eyes. And they've taken videos off for ridiculous reasons. And it's like whenever I explain this stuff to people, I think I even lose their attention within 5 minutes. They don't have the attention span.
Hmm.
Like, um, I don't think anybody's ever taken me up on my challenge to listen to Apple Podcast, which is not censored.
Hmm.
Listen to the audio and tell me what was dangerous about it.
Right.
And that same video was taken down by YouTube because it was dangerous.
Yeah.
And so the danger of censorship like that is especially for the younger people. They don't know what they didn't see. They never saw it. And
Hmm.
so they can't evaluate it
Hmm.
for themselves. So, yeah, there's got to be at least one major social media platform where you can have something that's not censored.
I think so. Right. I mean, I
Yeah.
think certainly censorship.
I think it went
We're
down on Facebook because Facebook was really bad during 2020. Do you remember that?
I don't.
Oh, it was bad. I mean, I was making fun of it. Like I was taking screenshots. I would do like
Oh, would
a
they put like warnings at the bottom or
yeah,
something
yeah,
about certain?
they would sometimes take your post down too. They reduced my reach to nothing.
Hmm.
I used to have a pretty big reach, and then all of a sudden it was I shared I shared a meme. It was a photograph of Hunter Biden in his underwear or something like on a bender, and he had his
Hmm.
underwear on. And I can't remember what the meme statement was, but they took it down for being sexually exploitive of adults or something, like violating community standards. And my reach was lowered to something like 1% of what it used to be for a year, a whole year because of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and um and at the same time during that year they were constantly trying to get me to boost posts.
Hmm.
So they were reducing my reach and at the same time saying, "Hey, could you pay us for, getting your reach back?" And it's like, I don't trust you guys at all. I'm not going to give you a dime.
Yeah.
So, if I don't have very many views on YouTube or anything else, I don't take it personally anymore. I put the information out there just in case anybody wants to see it. It's like a library. They can look at it if they want.
Right.
But um yeah, I did learn very quickly the dangers of it. I remain concerned in the future about censorship in ways that we haven't thought about before. Like
Uh, you know, I think there's a parallel here Um, and maybe you'll have to, I'm just thinking of it now. Um, my students, I had a student recently make the comment that philosophy seems to be just the overthinking of everything, which you can appreciate why someone would say that, of
Yeah.
course. We both have those backgrounds and we know kind of the intuition and the student is pulling at there.
Yeah.
But I try to tell them that, it's like, well, because so much of the work now is done with it's about the definition of concepts. And the entire philosophical method is really about the application of the concepts.
Hmm.
And I said, well, look, if you say, well, what do you think about gay marriage? And invariably they deal with the kind of they approach it from the sense of like the moral sense and from justice, and those are at least the seemingly the guiding facets of their commentary. But I try to point out to them, at the end of the day, it's about the definition of marriage.
Right.
And this goes across all of our issues, right? This is why all of our issues are generally, right? People say, well, we have all these political problems. Well, the political problems are really moral and philosophical problems that have, reached political, the political sphere, perhaps. Uh, for okay, abortion, huge issue. They approach it from a moral standpoint and right standpoint. At the end of the day, how do you define person?
Right.
Right. The trans issue, how you define woman.
Right.
Define, 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 define. It's
Yeah.
always about the definition of concepts at its root.
Yeah.
And so this is why you need to do philosophy and to do it well in order to get squared away on exactly what we're talking about. Now, here's where I'm kind of going with this, right? I also talk about like, well, hey, gun control. They're like, well, I think assault weapons should be banned. All right, fantastic. What's an assault weapon? Because definitions matter. If not in a philosophical sense, in a legal sense, you have to be able to define what it is that you're banning. And I don't know if you remember that, what was it, that show trial of the Second Amendment in Florida with Marco Rubio and was it Dana Lash or something? It was after a shooting. They had some sort of, it really turned out to be just like this kind of, someone called it like a Trotskyite show trial or something of the Second Amendment. And so uh, this is where a populace, again, it's like they don't know what they don't know, right? I think this is called like the Dunning-Kruger effect. Um, uh, they don't know what they don't know. So they said, well, why don't you? So someone sends up and says, well, why don't we ban assault weapons? And Rubio comes back and he says, well, it's because the gun manufacturers find loopholes. And the guy comes back and he says, well, close the loopholes. And it's like, well, you don't understand what it is that you're asking for, because the way that, with the backdrop being the Second Amendment, right? You define a fight. You define an assault weapon too broadly, and it doesn't pass Second Amendment muster. You define it too narrowly, it has no impact on what it is that you're trying to solve with the ban.
Right.
And so definitions matter here in this regard.
Yeah.
And this is something that, again, that seems to escape people who, to be fair, they're going to work, they're working, 9 to 5, construction site, uh, lawyer's office, whatever it is. And you and I, we spent a lifetime, thinking about these things and being
Yeah.
confronted with these things.
Yeah.
So
So you're saying we have a head start?
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
But it can be frustrating too,
Yeah.
because in ordinary, dialogue with people who are not, they don't travel in our circles. This is why it's hard for a philosopher to be kind of like a normal person, is because
Right.
if you sit down at the table and everybody's having drinks and appetizers, and 90% of the conversation, if it veers into anything meaningful, like 90% of it is just a bunch of confused bullshit.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
then the more you can't start it, it's like, well, I kind of have a joker policy, right?
Mhm.
There's a Joker says, back in the Dark Knight, Joker says, well, if you're good at something, never do it for free. And so I'm not going to sit there and take apart, the confusions at dinner if you know at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you understand why Socrates was killed, right? It's because he was annoying, right, to people who wanted to just get on with their lives.
I'm gonna bring up something that just we just went through in California, Prop 3,
Hmm.
regarding definitions. We covered this on the podcast pretty significantly. Prop 3, let me pull up the bill text really quick. I'm gonna stop sharing here. Um, I'm gonna pull up the text of the bill and share that. Let's see here. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. So this was proposed by well, I guess the assembly. Marriage equality. Already what I'm thinking, you're probably thinking the same thing. What do you mean by marriage?
Hmm.
California Constitution provides only a marriage between a man and a woman is valid. Well, that's another way of saying that's what there's a necessary condition in the definition of marriage.
Hmm.
Okay. So you got the whereases. So here it is. That section, that's Prop 8, that says marriage is a necessary condition as a man and a woman. Here's how it's switched. The right to marry is a fundamental right. Okay. And there's a couple of other sections there. There's little parts. Um, you notice that those other little parts have nothing to do with defining the word marriage,
Hmm.
and that the right to marry as a fundamental right does not define the word to marry, the verb to
Hmm.
marry, or which you have to define the noun marriage before you define that. Um, that's that's what Democrats were so excited about, getting rid of that language.
Hmm.
Okay, here's the voter guide. Oh, sorry. Picked up the wrong one again. Um, let me get that voter guide here. Can you see that?
Hmm.
Okay. What your vote means. Now notice here. A yes vote, there would be no change in who can marry. A no vote, there would be no change in who can marry. So this is a very ominous issue. Yeah, they're admitting, the Democrats are admitting that this will make no difference. I don't know how many millions of dollars was put on this, but so
Yeah.
there's no difference.
A symbolic measure then.
Okay. But what happened was they took the definition out and they didn't replace it with a new definition. Do you notice that? To your point, they would prefer no definition at all, which is what Obergefell did, because Obergefell overturned that, right? Obergefell
Hmm.
was the Supreme Court decision in 2015, written by Anthony Kennedy, the court decision, and there were four dissents, all Republicans. And Anthony Kennedy nowhere in that decision defines marriage.
Hmm.
He just says this definition is not it. But he doesn't say instead it's this. He doesn't give you another definition. So
Hmm.
uh, what the uh, what the dissents were worried about was um, that that if you don't define it, then the arguments for getting rid of man woman definition, you could run those wild. You could pretty much anything would follow from that
Right.
because the reason they said they were against it was that it discriminated. Well, every definition discriminates between what you mean and what you don't mean.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. So marriage is still discriminates, right? Still discriminates against single people. It
right.
still it still discriminates. It discriminates against polyamorous relationships. It discriminates against minor attracted persons,
Yeah.
right? So you're
Well, and
just
their slogan was love wins. That was their slogan. You can't make
yeah.
this up.
Yeah.
Well, if that's
Yeah.
it sounds like what you're saying is love is a sufficient condition for marriage, the presence of love.
Yeah.
Well, then what could
Yep.
possibly go wrong with that?
Right. Right.
So it's like,
Right.
yeah, there's not this philosophical um impulse that's cultivated. Well, at least I try to cultivate. I know you do, but it seems to be pretty hard to do.
Yeah. Well, this definitional problem, we were talking about free speech earlier, and this is one of the points I
Right.
was going to get to is that, hey, raise your hands. How many of you, students, how many of you are against hate speech? And like 90% of the class, of course, raises their hand. There's a few people that are on their phones or something, don't even care. But, like, so the follow up, look, okay, define hate speech.
Yeah.
Crickets. Because if you're going to make it policy, if you're going to put it into law, you've got to define what hate speech is. And this is where I think the argument, right, to me, John Stuart Mill, like Mill's understanding of speech to me is, uh, you know, open to criticism, but I think it's the best solution for speech
Mhm.
overall. Um, and so again, it's one of those issues where definitions matter, and because um, this is why censorship is so bad. In fact, that for John Stuart Mill, the Millian impulse is that you get to sort out ideas in the public sphere, right? You get to sort out ideas in the public by unrestricted speech.
Yeah.
Um, if you
Really
remember
important.
the during the pandemic, there was this, and John Stewart, right? Bless his heart. John Stewart went on to a
Not
show.
John Stuart
It's
Mill.
no, not John Stewart, different John Stewart, right? So John Stewart of the Daily Show fame, he went on. I think it was Colbert or something, and they were talking about um, the origins of COVID-19,
Oh, right. Yeah, I saw this. I
right?
saw this.
And
Yeah.
so it's like, well, it's one of those markets. It's the movie Contagion basically is a good. It's almost a documentary at this point, but the movie Contagion. So it came from one of these wet markets, right? But in Wuhan, there's a lab there that focuses on coronaviruses,
Yeah.
right? And this is what, one of the most infuriating things about leftism is that they are so ready to pull the racism, sexism, phobia lever right before we can ever even begin to discuss some of these issues, right?
Right.
I
Right.
want to know, right? And what the crazy thing that was back then too is that, well, so well, we investigated after that, because John Stewart come out and said, look, we there's a coronavirus lab in Wuhan. Now, the causal relationship could be either way. It could be the
Interesting.
lab is there because the viruses crop up there readily, or that the other way around in this case could have happened where a lab could have, had a leak and that coronavirus, made it into the ether. But it's worth investigating.
Yeah.
And so the fact that it wasn't investigated, that basically people were slammed as racist or what have you, before the hypothesis could even be investigated. And then after it had been investigated, the crazy part about it was, it's like basically it was this. It was, well, we heard from China and there was no leak.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
Right. So
trust them.
all of a
I
sudden,
I trust
the
them.
the CCP, right, has like, oh, they're telling the truth this time. Of course they're
Yeah.
telling the truth. You just assume that, right? And so this is
Yeah.
the kind of thing, right? To shutting down speech. And
Shutting
and
down
and here's the
speech.
other thing, right? So human beings are terrible with consequences. Short term, perhaps, but long term consequences we're terrible at, right? This is why utilitarian ethics is basically a disaster because you can't see into the future, like the future
Right.
consequences of your actions. But one of the unintended consequences of censorship is you breed other alternatives, right? In a marketplace, you can take your business elsewhere. You can go to Truth Social.
Yes.
Now there's something called Blue Sky. I don't know if you've heard of this. Blue Sky is meant to be kind of the new Twitter alternative. They just crossed like 20 million subscribers just in the last few days.
Wow.
And so this is, in some cases, people are saying, well, this is what Twitter as it used to be. But what we're seeing here is the balkanization of public space,
Hmm.
right? Where we're now getting to the point, and I think this was said, who was saying this, that 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 the online life has become such that it's a veritable choose your own adventure. Choose your own politics, choose your own tribe, choose your own this or that. I don't have to listen to things that challenge my own viewpoint because I can stay safely within the confines of my little app that I have, decided on. And so
Right.
this balkanization of social media, like everybody goes into their little corner, and then it comes out. And then the most horrible part about it is that when it comes to around times of election, that these non-overlapping, two completely sealed, like hermetically sealed containers of ideas, they come out into the public and they look at like, oh, you look at these people, they're like from Mars, right? That how could they think that? It's like, well, everyone in their little sphere thinks that.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, this is all right. It's the unintended consequences of censorship. You can censor and you think you're being paternal and protective, but you're actually weakening the people you're protecting, and at the same time having unintended consequences in terms of actual public discourse.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you need to have skills about how to define words, the skill one is how do you define definition? What do you even mean by a definition? Necessary and sufficient conditions. There's some really basic things you got to cover just to get there, you know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it requires an attention span. That's what I'm really worried about is
It
is that
it
people don't have an attention span.
it requires it requires a desire to know the truth.
Yes.
Because if they don't have that, you can give them all the tools they want, right? It's like hey, I want my kid. I'm a mechanic. I want my kid to become a mechanic. I'm going to buy him a tool set. Well, if he has no desire to work on cars, he's never really going to learn and apply the tools,
Yeah.
right? And so most students, and I did an informal survey in one of my classes, and I said, how many of you, I said, in a no BS, how many of you, if you could get a good job without having to go to college, how many of you would do so? How many of you would go to college anyways? And out of 40 students, how many do you think raised their hand?
Two.
Yeah, pretty close. I think it was
Okay.
three, maybe four.
Wow.
who liked college, who
Yeah.
liked learning,
Those are the people that study.
right? And those are the people, and nine times out of ten, uh, those my best students and the most engaged students, homeschoolers,
Oh yeah. Yeah, no doubt
almost
about it.
unequivocally
No doubt
homeschoolers.
about it. Yeah, yeah. That's right.
And a lot of times they do circles around my non-homeschooler
Right.
students.
Right. It's not that
But
hard either.
no, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Um,
Jeez.
but but here's the thing that education, what perhaps one of the most toxic elements in we could sort out the variables here in terms of who or what is to blame. But college is now, it is going through, it is jumping through the hoops to acquire your credential for the modern economy.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people don't even know what that is anymore. Like, what is this credential for? Like, what am I going to use this for?
Right. And I think that's where I think some Gen Z, you know, more entrepreneurial types are starting to emerge as saying, I'm not going to college. I'm going to start a business. I'm going to go
Yeah.
do this. I'm going to do that. And so here we're on this, what's called the demographic cliff, right? So that 2025 is supposed to be the real last, I think 24, 25, where the number of, you know, starting with the Great Recession, people started having fewer kids. And so now enrollment numbers are going to drop precipitously. At least they won't go up. Um, and there's all sorts of pathologies that are going to come out of this,
Mm.
and we can get into that another time. But um, so we're at the demographic cliff, and they're starting to wonder now, college being so expensive and seemingly very little return on investment, and so there are people that are seeking alternatives. But even then, like education, what you're doing, right? Sometimes, like my first day of class or first and second day of class, they're kind of like ice baths,
Mm.
like polar plunge type things. I'm throwing them in, like I'm doing some really just, I'm trying to kind of blow their minds a little bit because they've become so ossified in the way they think, right? Everything
Yeah.
is just, sorted out. Like it's like this kind of emotive pragmatism they live their lives by. And it's to shock them out of their right, to show them some very common things they believe are likely to be false.
Hmm.
And really, I'm just trying to
Can
break
you
up this
can you give
hard
an
ground.
example for
Well, I think it's an example, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder,
okay.
right? So what that really amounts
Ow,
to,
my eye.
well, it presupposes, right? So almost everyone in the class believes that, right? But really, this is a kind of aesthetic relativism, right?
Yeah.
But what it means is that ultimately there are no objects that are beautiful. I'm
Right.
only having beautiful feelings.
Mhm.
So nothing is really beautiful.
My
And so
my
beauty
my
really,
feelings are beautiful when I walk by you.
yeah, yeah. But
My
there's
my
nothing
eye is
really
beautiful.
beautiful, right? And so if nothing is really beautiful, uh, then beauty essentially is meaningless.
Yeah.
And so in effect, you've said nothing. And so there are some of these things that I try to, I deal with mathematics, right? Mathematical, Pythagorean theorem, for example, or just the existence of numbers, right? And show them some very common things that they just use every day and have taken for granted actually have this kind of mysteriousness to them,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah,
So,
the thing about beauty is I think that most people do subconsciously do believe beauty does exist
yes,
because that's the best explanation for why we talk the way we talk.
yeah. No, like, so in one of the things I just give an example of is if anybody's ever seen a sunset in Hawaii. I was on Waikiki Beach, and my wife and I were walking, and there was one time where there was a sunset that the way that the colors and the sun was shining through the clouds and the way the sun was kind of tucked into the clouds, I can't really even, you know, I can't paint the picture for you, and a picture wouldn't do any justice anyways. But after everybody was walking on the beach, basically stopped just to watch.
Hmm.
And once the sun had set, people clapped, right? People clapped. And I said, if you find me someone who thinks that that sunset is ugly, I will find you someone. You have found someone who I think is clinically insane. Right. And
Yeah.
so, but their understanding of beauty, they think in terms of beauty as beauty standards, as in people are the beautiful things. They have a very narrow focus of what they consider to be beautiful, and so that's the only thing they think about. They don't think about sunsets or mountain ranges or the Tetons being snow capped, or a couple of cubs that are playing in a meadow or something, bear cubs playing in a meadow. I was just up in Tahoe last week, and I had this distinct moment of beauty where I was walking next to this canal, and there were just a pair of ducks, and they were just playing, dipping under. The water was glassy, so they're the only ones disturbing it. And in the background is just rays of light that are just coming through the trees and just kind of highlighting the ducks and their play
Wow.
and stuff. And it was just a kind of magical little moment,
Oh man.
And so those things don't usually make it into the sphere of what they understand. Beauty for them
Right.
is about bodily shapes and inadvertently, erotic elements of a person or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a very, very narrow and very kind of bodily
Yeah. They haven't done the
focused beauty.
phenomenology on beauty, and yeah, they haven't
Yeah.
done the phenomenal. They haven't thought carefully about what they're experiencing,
Yeah.
observed. Yeah.
So, uh,
Well, people are distracted. If you have a fragmented attention span, how in the world, how do you get them to pay attention to that lecture? In that, is that the first day of class you do that? Or
yeah, I mean, I go right into kind of the deep end on the first lecture
do
just
you,
because
do you have issues with cell phones in class? Do people bring the textbook? Do they read?
textbooks are almost all digital now,
Ugh.
and students don't take notes. They take pictures of. If you do PowerPoints, they'll just take pictures of the slides, but they don't see. But because enrollment is connected to money, and enrollment ultimately is the thing that matters most to administrations.
Mhm.
They won't say that. Um,
Usually the most
there's
important
no
things on campus are not
accountability.
said.
Yeah. There's no accountability for students.
Right.
There's no accountability. Um,
What could possibly go wrong?
because what, but this is like, there's families that are complicit in this too, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
Because what, hey, Johnny, make sure you get a good grade,
Yeah.
right?
I'm so proud
That's
of
what
you.
parents care about, grades.
Yeah, they don't care
It
about
is
learning.
the question needs to be changed. It needs to be changed to, Johnny, did you master
Yes.
US history this term?
Do you know it cold?
Do
I
you
don't
do
care
you
about your
know
grade. Do you
US
know it?
history?
Yeah.
Yes. So the grades are not a proxy for knowledge now.
No. Not at all for a
So
long
that's all they
time.
care about is good grades. And even then, it's they only care about really, and this is some like, hey, you know what? It's only cheating if you get caught. And so there's
Well,
ethical
right.
compromises.
Yeah, yeah. And the grade used to be a great, I mean, I think it still is a great idea because it's supposed to motivate the student to learn in
Yeah.
the weak moments of the will. But
Yeah.
the problem is the students evaluate the professors. And
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
the ways they evaluate the professor is they just don't sign up for people who don't inflate grades.
Yeah.
And that's like the
It's
biggest evaluation you can get. Like,
yeah.
just I'm not going to sign up.
Oh, it's at least among the part-time faculty, not everywhere, but in some places it's a race to the bottom
Oh yeah,
because
yeah.
you've
I
got
see it all the time.
a pack of part-timers
Oh yeah.
who one class in California, one class is a big financial hit to take to
Oh yeah.
lose. Two is, you know, for some adjunct is unbearable.
Right.
And so, how do you not lose classes? Well, if you're given a couple of classes, you're giving two classes on a semester, and and you're holding the line. You're not inflating grades. You're forcing, you're holding students accountable, and then that gets out in the rate my professor sphere,
Okay, hold
or it
on.
gets in some sort of alternative channel.
I gotta pause. Okay, I wanted to show you something. I'm gonna share my screen again. Those who are listening only, well, go to the YouTube, you'll see what I'm talking about. That's not what I was gonna share. Hold on a sec. Okay, got it. There's this guy that I'm friends with that's a pro Second Amendment professor, just got laid off, Tim Shao.
Mhm.
For the past year, I've experimented with giving timed open book, open note writing assignments in my in-person classes. As easy as this would seem, I have been surprised at how many students still fail and how many students don't even bother to buy the textbook. And I'm the only one that laughed at it. Well, I guess there's a couple more that came up. And I said, students in name only, Stenos.
Mhm.
It's kind of like what you're saying. This would have been inconceivable, inconceivable when I first started teaching. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would have been inconceivable 10 years ago. Open
Yeah.
note, open book.
Yep.
Um,
I'm not surprised. It doesn't surprise me at all.
you know,
Yep. Doesn't surprise me at all. And
and they're not
that
even buying the textbook. What
yeah,
what what are we even doing?
my textbooks. One thing that I realized is it was during the pandemic, I think, and so students would there was a student, two students who were uh caught cheating, and one of them confessed, like fessed up to it. And he said, well, I got it off some girl. She shared it on Discord. So Discord is the place where students basically pool all their talents and then try to essentially help one another as best they can
It's
to
a
pass the
website.
class.
It's a website.
It's basically a social media platform. And so you can put so what happened was then I got in there and found the student who was responsible for sharing their essay, and then that student, I had to have a separate conversation with that student. um but I also noticed in that platform somebody had managed to get an entire PDF copy of the textbook and posted it for free in Discord in violation of copyright, like ridiculous. We're talking, you know 35 to 45 students who don't have to spend money on textbooks, which you might like, oh, that's a good thing. But this is all
The,
parasitic upon the whole
right.
operation of building quality textbooks.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is,
Well, and these textbooks are expensive. They're so expensive.
yes.
And the digital textbooks with quotations around the word book, they were originally billed to save the students money, right? They were like, this is
Hmm.
going to save them money. It's going to be convenient.
Yep.
And it was all couched in the green campus crap, like we're paperless and all this crap. And I was like, I saw through that right away because all they did was they skyrocketed in price way above what even paper textbooks were. They stayed a little bit lower than paper textbooks. That's all they had to do. And then when you have the anti-paper mentality, which is supposedly motivated by this valence issue that they made up of this is going to destroy the planet or not destroy the planet. Um, then all of a sudden you're stuck with these digital copies that are very expensive, and then all of a sudden you have screens in the classroom now. You have to have screens now competing for the professor's attention.
Yep. Um, I think,
The student's attention is what I mean.
yeah. I'll just put a note here, just for you to remind me, and it's just great liberal hope. That's just kind of throw that at me when maybe we'll come back to it. Um,
Great liberal hope.
yes,
Okay.
might as well start in on it now. Why not, right?
All right.
So the great liberal hope of moving from analog to digital classrooms essentially has failed, right? Uh, but the hope of education itself has failed, right? Education was supposed to be a kind of cure-all coming out of like the World War II period, and it's to me that hypothesis, right? And I think it's this is for a separate discussion, but I think it's built into your kind of progressive leftist ontology, like what a human person is, that somehow education would be the thing that would enable, you know, everyone to rise or something like that. But and I seem to remember an article many years ago that was published on one comment on it was that the era of psychological man has failed. So we're 100 years deep in psychotherapy with very little to show for it. Like the promise of psychotherapy has not delivered, at least as far as I can see it. The promise of education as lifting all boats has not, right. The promise of social media has failed. The promise of the digital classroom is failing, right? And so this, I mean, this is a huge, I mean, this is not anything I can really flesh out, but it seems to me that this is a very big hypothesis that, as I'll tell my students, I said, I don't care if you don't have to believe anything I say, but listen and test for yourself, right? That these things are all failing. Um, this last election was a failure of the credentialed class that's built upon a succession of failures of the credentialed class. And when I say credentialed, I think you know what I mean. The Ivy League pipeline, right? That most of the ruling class comes from like six Ivy League schools on the East Coast or something is absurd, right? Don't talk to me about we the people. You held that up a minute ago. We the people. Don't tell me that. It's not we the people. It's we the credentialed class. Sheldon Wolin. There was a podcast I was watching. It was on PBS, and the premise was saving our democracy, right? Saving our democracy, which has been the rallying cry forever. But if you read Sheldon Wolin, we haven't had a democracy in quite some time. Not a democracy of we the people. We've had a democracy, what he calls a managed democracy, and it's been managed by a ruling class. So that you're voting, you're like, well, my vote, every vote counts, right? It's a fiction, right? Because the credentialed class has been busily at work trying to essentially get you to sabotage your own interests with your own vote. And so the failure of the credentialed class is Trump is not the he's not the illness, he's the symptom. He's a symptom of a credentialed class that has failed, right? And so yeah, this is just, I want to get kind of past the mythology of the moment here, in terms of what this election really means, right? It's the culmination. This is many years in the making of the failure of the credentialed class to look after the actual interests of people as they are, not as they read about in their sociological textbooks, right? Because it's like, well, yeah, you really care about people. It's, well, look, when people say that, I'm sorry, this is the left, right? The left is like, why would we care about people? You only care about people in the abstract. Care about them in
Mhm.
the abstract to get them like, well, I want to vote for something. So it's always got like, so as long as they're like hands off, like distant, they're just at a distance, like homelessness or something like that. So I care about them. You care about them in the abstract, but you won't do anything personally or sacrificially to actually help them.
Mhm.
Right. So, so the failure of the credentialed class, and to be fair, I don't think Harris ever really had a chance because you might look at it as, right, first of all, the explanations of the 2024 election, uh, if your first thing that you're going to say is racism, right, you're beyond help almost, right? This is one of the most frustrating things, right? The same voters that just rejected, more so rejected Kamala Harris, those same voters are two-time Obama voters. So don't talk to me
Well, what
about
they'll say is
racism.
they'll say sexism. They'll
Right. So
say
they'll put the
misogyny.
right, right, right. So that too is too threadbare of a hypothesis. And here's something I learned, my friend, and I hadn't thought about this because he's much more embedded in this stuff. Well, I'll just not mention his name, but he says that univariate analyses are almost always mistaken. So if you're saying that an event happened, especially when it comes to the social and political stuff, if you're saying an event happened for just one particular reason, it's in all likelihood you're wrong. Right. Harris lost because there was basically every incumbent party in the world has lost in the last few years. Right. Um, that's part of it. 70% of the people were unhappy with the direction the country was going in. And she was that direction. She was that direction. And Trump was the candidate of change.
Right. And I think people knew what they were getting with Trump. They're like,
Yeah.
okay, been there,
Yeah.
done that. Actually was pretty good. I know everybody was freaking out for the entire time. There was always some kind of scandal that always seemed made up. Like the Russia collusion thing. That was a big nothing burger. And then, Brett Kavanaugh's the stories they made up about him, that was a big nothing burger. There
Mhm.
were just a bunch of stuff that they kept throwing at him. And actually things were pretty good for, you know, as far as the economy goes and as far as I mean, not if you look at the television, which but if you just look at the gas price and you look at, you know,
Yeah.
optimism about the future, it seemed like people were pretty happy.
Yeah. The credentialed, yeah. So getting back to the credentialed class in this past election, the credentialed class is basically scolding the populace
Yeah.
who's complaining about the economy.
Hmm.
But the economy, when you say economy, economy is ambiguous because to the credentialed class, it's stock market, it's unemployment, it's all these metrics.
Hmm.
For your average middle class person, economy means in terms of what I'm making, how far does my dollar go?
Right.
And when everything is more expensive, two and three times as expensive in some cases, right? And so even then, right, some of the credential class, which is just this is I mean it's typical, right? You look at something like CNN, MSNBC. It's like why are we can't trust the seven-figure club to tell us what is really going on with the middle class,
Hmm.
right? Like Anderson Cooper, for example, his salary is like 20 million a year. Do you think that guy, do you think economy, when he says economy, he's worried about the price of eggs? At 20 million, you're not worried about the price of eggs, right? So everything is more expensive. Cars. There was something today that I saw about cars. There's very few cars left that are under $50,000 now. And car payments are now four figures.
Jeez.
Four figures. And so all of this, and as you go down the economic ladder, inflation is a progressive tax the other way.
Well, a lot of the issues with cars have to do with the types of cars that they're coming out with.
Yeah.
You don't need what you're coming out with. In
No.
fact, I would rather you go the other way. Give me an engine, give me some bells and whistles as far as how to turn the engine on, how to roll up the window and how to roll it down and how to
Yep.
lock it.
Yep.
Maybe an indoor light would be great and hopefully it doesn't smell too bad. Give
I've
me
thought
that.
about, it'd be interesting to start a car company and just call it simple, like simple something.
Yeah.
And all it is, it's basically, I don't know, you borrow like a Mazda chassis, an engine, and then just build a simple, well, a 5 speed on it, and has whatever the necessary like safety components are. And you just throw your phone into the dash, and that's like how the car kind of runs. And that's it. You have air conditioning. You
I don't know
have
if I want a phone doing it all, but yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's there are there are a variety of ideas that
Yeah.
we could throw around. But yeah, there's so much stuff, and it's because, well, cheaper cars have lower margins, like in terms of
Sure.
profit margins, and so these companies have chosen higher profit margins over volume.
Hmm.
But anyways, that's another thing. So the taxation, right? The inflation is a progressive tax, like an inverted progressive tax or something. It adversely affects the working class in ways, right? Look at France, for example. Right? When France they came and I think it was gosh, what's his name?
Marcon.
Marcon, and they came through with a fuel tax that was a climate change initiative, if I remember correctly. And basically, the middle class revolted, right? The credentialed class doesn't have to, like, if they live in Paris and whatnot, they don't have to worry about the price of gas. But the farmer who's trucking all of his goods into the city from wherever in France, right? He has to worry about fuel prices because it's extravagant, depending on how much that you are trucking in, how often and whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, this is again over and over and over. The credentialed class is failing. If people don't like Trump, well, it's the credentialed class's fault.
Hmm. Wow.
So, and the other thing too with Harris, right? Harris, she didn't really have a chance in part because did you ever read Steven Skoronik?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My American political development prof studied under him at Yale.
Oh, okay. Right. So he
So
talks about
I'm his grandchild. Like how
yeah,
we're Willard, Dallas Willard's grandchild in philosophy.
yeah.
I'm kind of his grandchild on American political development. I'm not sure how much I really want to brag about that, but I'm also,
Yeah,
Harry Jaffa's grandchild and
yeah. But so
Leo.
his political time, right? So that
Yeah.
a regime comes into power, right? If you look at the Bush era,
Hmm.
8 years, people are tired of 8 years of like McCain basically had no chance.
Yeah.
And so Obama he's the counter. He's the counter to the last 8 years. And so he inaugurates essentially a new era. for the most part, if Skowronek is right, uh, the fact that uh, Obama was like a once in a generation talent is largely irrelevant.
Hmm.
Whoever occupied that space would have won. Um, and so what we have is once it the reason why it's so difficult to maintain, like, to if you're following, say, Bush, like, whatever, if there's a problem with that particular regime that the public doesn't like, you're going to be basically repudiated by the next election.
Right.
So, but if it's really good, so Reagan had eight years, and then HW came in, and he was essentially the extension of the Reagan era. But at that point, he's trying to maintain that regime, and it starts to kind of fall apart on him a little bit. And that invited the challenge, which then, of course, went to Clinton. And all this to say that this is the way that presidential politics basically kind of functions structurally.
Hmm.
There's an established regime, and then once that regime is kind of like run out of gas, so to speak, then you get the repudiating regime that comes in.
Hmm.
Harris didn't distinguish herself from Biden. Biden, for whatever purposes you want to say, that the dissatisfaction was so low. Maybe there were a lot of things out of his control. Uh, we could take that, as just for the sake of argument, accepting that. But she had to markedly differentiate herself from Biden
Right.
in
And
order
then at
for
the
her
same
to,
time, yeah, at the same time, convince everybody that she was to have credit for being in power and having the experience.
right, right. So, I mean, in a way, she was kind of in an impossible
Hmm.
situation, structurally impossible situation.
Yeah,
Um,
which she figured out probably almost immediately.
yeah, yeah. So,
I think it was just a Hail Mary.
it
I
was,
don't,
and I think if they had a primary, I think that would have helped. But
oh,
Biden,
yeah,
yeah,
of course. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
if they would have just been honest earlier. Yeah, but they took a gamble. I mean, if Biden was really if he really got 81 million votes, which is quite a bit more than Obama got and quite a bit more than Cami got, then, well, I guess they had to run him against Trump because that was the only option. He's the only
right,
one that could beat Trump.
right,
Well, problem is he could only beat him once.
right.
And then you're left with this guy who, well, could beat him, maybe. And that's a big maybe. I'm skeptical he really got 81 million votes.
Hmm.
Um, I think there's something weird about that chart. There's something weird about it. I think it's going to be studied for a long time, and I think the truth will eventually come out.
Yeah,
But it won't, I don't think it's going to come out for a while.
yeah.
But um, I think it has something to do with the way the voting changed in 2020.
Sure. I
And
think some
and
of
I
those numbers, yeah.
oh I saw it. There was a motivation to ratchet up the hysteria. I saw it. I from the very beginning of 20 that the scamdemic, the what I would call what Wasabi would call the plandemic.
Hmm.
But just I just call it the public health scare, the panic. It was the panic. I saw who was on the panic side, and it was all Democrats. And I just thought, well,
Yep.
there's there's a motivation there that I don't think people understand. There was a
There's,
motivation.
yeah.
It was an electoral motivation.
There was
He
a
was
New
on his
York
way to
Times.
reelection easily.
Yeah, yeah,
The economy was his biggest thing, so
yeah,
that's where he was most vulnerable.
yeah. New York Times did a study of this, and in proportion or in relation to uh, how serious COVID-19 was. And like on the political spectrum, I'll have to find this article, but on the political spectrum, the further right you were, the more you would downplay the COVID-19 lethality and stuff. And so it was more lethal than the far right thought it was. But then if you go towards the left,
Oh yeah.
they thought it was like a 50-50 chance you would end up on a ventilator or something.
Yeah, which is way off.
And so
And with
that's
kids too. They were
and
way
so
off with
then
kids.
you just take that for what it is, right? And assuming that that's correct. And you have an explanation for the
Sure.
lockdown stuff, right?
Yeah.
Why it is schools were closed for multiple years. They're 90 something percent Democrat,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Um, when and we knew, right? So the data was out there, I think. If I remember correctly, the data was out there 6 months into the pandemic. We knew that it was primarily a disease that affected the elderly and those with pre-existing conditions. And so we didn't need to shut down the entire economy for the next 3 years or what have you, right? The next 2 years afterward. Once we had that, policy should have been narrowed to focus on protecting some of those people instead of just shutting down the entire economy.
Oh yeah.
And so the economic conditions, which is interesting, that the left is more, right? The shutdown is
Well, yeah,
that's their baby.
sure.
And then the consequences, all the inflation, right? Because of
Yeah,
supply
yeah, yeah.
line issues and everything else, the global conditions that led to
You know,
Harris's predicament.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It wasn't the shutdown of the entire economy. It was a sledgehammer approach, but it was the way they did it.
Yeah.
They started using words like essential and inessential.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, essential for what is what I was asking.
Yep.
Essential for what?
Yep.
Everybody's job, if they need it, is essential for making a living. And making a living is essential.
Yep.
There is no
The
such thing
credentialed
as an
class gets to
inessential.
tell you what's essential, what's not
Yeah, that's
essential.
exactly right. And they started going after constitutionally enumerated rights. And here you want to see Josh Blackman, the essential free exercise clause. I'll pull it up. Josh Blackman, the essential Second Amendment. These are excellent, excellent. I'm going to share my screen here so that people get a sense. I haven't done anything on these yet. Here's Jay Blackman, the essential free exercise clause, the essential free exercise clause, the essential Second Amendment. Um, you can pull this up. It's free. I definitely don't want to accept all cookies. Not sure how to get rid of that. Well, anyway, you can see it, you can download it, and you've got the free exercise clause one, which is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
I've printed this out and read it. I contacted him about coming on the podcast, and he said he was too busy at the time, and I believe him because I looked at what he was doing, and he was everywhere, like all over the Trump stuff this past year with all the legal stuff he was having. So he was all over that. Um, this is stuff he did in 2021. And he said, "Hey, knock yourself out, tackle this." And so I've read all of this. That they were going after enumerated rights and saying they were inessential.
Mm-hmm.
Churches, gun stores, covered this quite a bit on the podcast as far as I think it was McDougal versus Ventura County. I think 3 or 4 episodes on that court case.
Yeah.
That was last year. Um, so the when we say scamdemic, that's what we mean. There was there was an evil that came out. that was pretty hideous. And I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, I'm not saying it's any particular human being or group of human beings. I think it's a dark spiritual presence. Um, and the reason I say that is because I don't think people are that smart.
Yeah. No, I don't.
I don't think they're smart enough
Yeah.
to pull up off some. This is a presence that has greater than human capacity for comprehension of connections of how things work. And there were definitely human participants, but
Yeah.
like
No,
Fauci should
I
have been
don't.
fired immediately. But
I don't think there's with all the kind of conspiratorial talk that's gone on, I think in the last 5, 6 years or whatever, I don't give people that much credit. I don't.
yeah,
Um, the thing of it is, people, especially if there's a conspiracy, someone always talks, right? I
yeah,
don't trust
right.
people
They're
to
not
be
good at
able to
keeping
keep
secrets.
secrets. No,
Sure.
they're just
Yeah.
these are human beings. This isn't
Fauci's not that smart. You know, he's that's part of why no one likes him,
right.
you know.
I mean, it's very rarely do you get something like the apostles who under death do not recant what they
Right, 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 right.
saw and heard and handled, etc.
Do you
Right.
feel like there's some people are saying it's almost like there was a big reset button that was pushed when Trump was elected. Do you feel any kind of sense?
No, but I find that both Trump and the pandemic were very illuminating
Mm,
because there was a certain type of I think there's been a certain type of make believe about what's been going on, but it's been many years in the making, right? I remember the media during the Bush administration that in the aftermath of going to war, that many of the media personalities were talking about how basically we were doing fine, and it was Bush who divided us,
right.
right? And I'm thinking, no, the divide was always there.
Yeah.
It only took pressure to surface it.
Mm,
And so I think each one of these kind of social political stressors surfaces this kind of dark underbelly each time. It's like we learn something new about the ruling class, the credential class, people in general, the condition of our institutions. It's all been illuminating as far as
mm,
I understand.
right.
And we can't, right? This is one of the bedrocks of why to try and get students to appreciate epistemology, that you will do better in life if you have more true beliefs than false beliefs. And so to have more true beliefs about the way things are, it requires illumination. And so all of these events have been to me illuminating about the populace, about the credentialed class, about our institutions. And that in many cases, people have just been covering up how bad they've gotten.
Where do you think higher education is going in the near future?
Oh, it's hard to say.
How many
Really
years have
hard.
you how many years have you been teaching now?
I'm 18 deep now.
Wow.
Yeah. It's
My
almost starting to
gosh.
seem like a career, which I never really signed up for,
Wow.
but here I am. So it's a strange one. I think um, there's going to be some difficult times ahead because enrollment dipping means
Yeah.
that money is going to dip, and then they're going to have to make some decisions.
What
And
classes have you taught?
critical thinking, world religions, intro to philosophy, philosophy of religion, and a critical thinking and writing class, and ethics, modern contemporary ethical issues.
And which one's your favorite to teach?
Oh, philosophy of religion was amazing.
Hmm.
Partly because I mean the students like that class just worked. I mean the students uh, they were dialed in. They were present. They were they gave me smashing reviews. I had no complaints about them whatsoever.
Upper
It might have
level?
been just might yeah, it was been like a junior level class, junior senior level class. So it was just I maybe it was a one off, but it was just a smashing class. Only taught it once because it didn't feel. Um,
Yeah.
I think last time we tried to run it was maybe around just after the pandemic, if I'm not mistaken, when we were back on campus. I think
And nobody signed up for it or what?
it was just it was low enrollment, so they
So you
had
were
to
saying
cancel it.
enrollment is a key issue as far as the future of
It
education.
is, it is, it
Yeah.
is. I am running out of time here, so um, perhaps this is a good place to stop if we could.
Sure. No problem.
And but it's been great.
You have a parting shot?
I don't. I think I've said enough at this point, and if we want to do maybe zero in on something we've kind of covered, it seems like we've covered just about everything. So when to zero in, we could probably come back and do that at another time.
We haven't covered Ukraine. That's what's all over the news today. Putin said he's going to nuke everybody
Oh,
because Biden used one of they used one of our missiles.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but I mean, they're using our bullets or they're using our guns or whatever.
yeah.
I mean,
I will say that this
they,
should be a time of social and political learning, especially
yeah,
for the left. And to see because I think David Brooks is right. I think it helps to have good parties in a system that requires political parties. And that benefits people. And so I think there are some things, I've said this like 10, 15 years ago that the left, if they just threw their Second Amendment, their anti-Second Amendment people overboard, they could have rewritten the economy for a couple generations. That's all it probably would have taken 10, 15 years ago. That time has passed. Gun control, as far as I'm concerned, is passed. That's just it's a moot point at this point because 3D printing of guns, et cetera, and with the hundreds of millions that are in circulation,
yeah.
to me, yeah, it's there's not much you can do
There's other fish to
on that issue.
fry. Plus,
Yeah,
they
there's a
lost the argument.
yeah, yeah. So,
So, all right.
but anyways,
All right, buddy. I'm going to
good
pause
seeing
it.
you.
See you.
See
Thanks
ya.
for coming on.